Hey, welcome to Best Practices for Managing a Multi-Vendor UC Environment webinar. Nice to have you here today, here with Irwin Lazar, who is the President and Principal Analyst at Metrigy. In about 25 minutes, we're going to walk you through some important considerations that you should have as you decide how to manage your own UC environment. Um, for starters, let me introduce myself. My name is Micah Singer. I'm the CEO of Kurmi Software. Let me advance over. Kurmi is an international company with offices in Paris and Rennes, originally French in origin, office in New York, and with sales outposts in Dubai and Sydney. We have customers in more than 25 countries. Most of our customers are quite large enterprises who benefit from service management and automation. We also work extensively and more with managed service providers and service providers all over the world. The company is 12 years old. We've won a series of awards, and we're excited to take on the challenges of a more and more complex world that includes many vendors and many systems that have added complexity to all of our lives. Irwin, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Irwin Lazar, President, Principal Analyst with a company called Metrigy. I lead our research coverage in the unified communications and collaboration space. And Metrigy is a company spends our time going out and gathering data from IT leaders, IT practitioners. We look for what are they doing, what are their challenges, what is driving their decisions, how are they organizing, how are they spending their money. And then we identify what the characteristics are of successful organizations. So we look at how are companies generating tangible return on investment, including cost savings, revenue increases, productivity gains, and so on related to their investments in communication, collaboration, and customer engagement technologies. And excited to be here.
Thanks a lot, Irwin. So just to keep us moving along, I know we have an ambitious agenda for a short period of time, and I want to give you a chance to introduce it.
Sure. So our goal here is to help our audience understand what are some of the challenges in multi-vendor management in the UC environment, and then what some of the solutions and best practices and approaches are. So we'll talk about some of those challenges. We'll talk about the need to standardize how you enable administration for organizations, opportunities to reduce cost and complexity, opportunities to streamline and improve internal IT support through integration of administration management with IT service management, the tools that can help you do that. And then we'll wrap up with some recommendations. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Kurmi solution.
Great, yeah, no, absolutely, and the right starting point is really setting the table for where we sit as an industry right now. What we call it the evolving UC landscape, and we have a few slides on that. And this is great. This is really Metrigy is one of your sweet spots. You guys do the work to bring this information to us and to many people in our industry. So let's try and set the table well here.
Yeah, it's definitely an area of strong focus for us as we see companies often struggling with managing their UC environments. And it's something that has undergone fairly rapid transformation over the last couple of years as we've entered this world of hybrid work and often video first work. So what this chart shows is just, we asked our participants in our latest study, 440 companies. It was a global study, North America, Western Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia. What do you consider to be the core of your collaboration environment? And so we've moved off of this voice-centric world to one where team collaboration and provisioning team collaboration users and applications like Microsoft Teams, as an example, have become a critical business tool, and video meetings have become maybe even a more critical business tool. So we've got the challenge of, as we think about things from an administration management perspective, it's not just a matter of provisioning phone numbers and phones. It's now a matter of provisioning and administrating a lot of different applications and a growing number of endpoints. And then the second primary challenge that we have seen organizations facing is, I don't have people in the office anymore. It's not as easy to manage them as it was before. Maybe they come in part-time during the week. They're in a few days and home the rest, or maybe they're home full-time, or maybe they're in the office full-time. So in the context of management challenges, we've seen an explosion driven again by the growing mix of applications, as well as the need to support hybrid employees.
It's fascinating. When I think back sort of 10 years ago and what's changed, it's really in both of these directions that you've brought up. I mean, on one hand, what unified communications was, it was, I think, 10 or maybe 20 years ago, it was largely PBX, and now there's a lot of systems that we all would consider part of communications that are essential to work. You mentioned them: video, meetings, phones still in there, productivity software, chat. And then, so that's gotten a lot more complex. And then by the same token, it's not just about a phone in the office on your desk, it's everywhere. So it's like all these things and all the places that we all travel and go and on the go. So it paints a very complex picture of what's happening. And I think some of the following slides will as well. Let's carry on.
Yeah, I mean, even to your point, it's not just a single device per person anymore, but multiple ones. You might have a phone on your desk at home and in the office. And so what we have found in our research is a fairly decent, significant change over the last couple of years as far as what do IT leaders measure and what do they care about. I came out of an IT background. Our goal was to get our technologies up and running and hope they didn't break and then move on to the next project. That's still important. Obviously, if you're provisioning a phone system or a meeting or messaging application, it has to work. But what we find that IT leaders are mostly concerned about, and often what they're being evaluated on, is the impact that they have on productivity. So how do I streamline provisioning of applications such that people get up and running more quickly, that when they have problems or they need to make changes, that they can get fixed more quickly, and that they can actually take advantage of the value that those applications bring to the table. So if you're delivering communication collaboration tools, the bottom line is they have to deliver measurable value. You can see productivity gains, cost savings, user feedback as being the top metrics that IT leaders are measuring when they judge the success of their investment in collaboration applications. Again, certainly things like voice and video quality and uptime are important, but productivity came out as in our latest study as the most important most important KPI for measuring collaboration success.
Okay, so you have all these goals, and what's it lead these businesses and service providers to put in front of their customers, and what kind of vendors does it take them to build these technology offerings?
Yeah, and this is where it really starts to get interesting. So let's first look at voice. Our data asked, or our study asked participants, how do you architect your phone system today? And when you look specifically at the market of over 1,000 companies, about a third right now are using UCaaS, about 31% are on-prem, about 24% are using private hosted solutions, either that's hosted in a carrier or possibly in a private cloud. There's about 6% of companies that don't really consider themselves to have an enterprise phone system. They are predominantly relying on mobile devices and clients on personal mobile devices versus provisioning phones and provisioning more traditional phone system. And a lot of the other question that comes up a lot is are phones going away? Are phones less important? And we find about 37% of our participants in the large enterprise segment are seeing increasing call volumes, increasing call utilization, largely due to customer facing calls, whether those are inbound or outbound for sales or customer support. There's also a strong preference for many individuals to just pick up a phone and make a call versus engage in a chat or fire up a video meeting for everything. And then, the important part, I think, to note is the chart on the left isn't necessarily static. That's the primary calling architecture. But for those who are on-prem, as you can see in the blue box, about 16% are also using UCaaS. About 14% are planning on adding UCaaS. That could be as a full replacement for on-prem or to supplement on-prem. Often with larger companies, they're growing through acquisition. So they're bringing different environments into their organization that they may need to preserve for a variety of different reasons. Even on the UCaaS side, about 18%, they're using more than one UCaaS provider. So I might have a provider in one part of the world and a different provider in a different part. Or again, I grew through acquisition or so on. Only about 40% of that group are planning on consolidating. So what that tells you is there's a lot of mixed vendor environments. It's certainly something that's going to continue because these transitions, especially for large organizations, they take a long time. If you're, an on-prem platform today, and maybe you're going, say, Microsoft Teams, that might be a multi-year provisioning. So, the reality, I think, is that migration never ends.
This is a really loaded slide, and you brought up a lot of points that we see a lot at Kurmi as we're talking to customers, and a few of the ones that I'll highlight are this one at the top. I mean, 61% of providers or of enterprises are using multiple providers, and there's a stat here: 39% plan to consolidate, 61% don't even plan to consolidate, and then there's that challenge of the different categories, meetings versus these different types of UC, where I think there's a real incentive to use what your organization finds as best of breed, or what you're used to, or what you've acquired through an acquisition or a merger. And then we talk about multi-vendor, but even nowadays there's this thing of multi-system. There's we see a lot of, say, for Cisco's in a huge process of on-prem to cloud migration, something that's really important to them, but lots of enterprises are stuck between the two, and it's sort of it becomes this. I always think of the Marvel as an Infinity War. I think of it as an Infinity Migration. It feels like you're always migrating from one system to another, and it puts a lot of strain on IT organizations. So it's interesting to see the stats that underpin these trends that we experience more viscerally in our business. But let us keep moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I would add in is, it's, as we talk about we focus on management. Obviously, management complexity increases with the number of different vendors that you have, and we find that the market's not, one size fits all. Among the folks that are using UCaaS, you can see Microsoft. This was about the 30% or so of larger companies that were using UCaaS. You can see Microsoft has a pretty large segment of that market. But like to your point earlier, you also have a lot of Cisco out there. You might be in a mixed environment where maybe you're going through that transition from one to the other, and a lot of other UCaaS providers that are out there as well. So it's not, again, a one size. We all have one vendor, and that's all we have to worry about managing. But it's much more of a complex environment, and certainly as we think about PST and connectivity, which we'll get into in a second.
I mean, we were as we were talking about this before, that this is, you've broken down on this slide. You guys have broken down UCaaS users, but in each category of UC system, like meetings, there's a different sliding scale, or even on-prem. This right here is cloud. It's as a service, but we could look at 5 or 10 slides that show these breakdowns, and there's different vendors in there. Obviously, Microsoft and Cisco are often the leaders, but there's a lot of, but in meetings it's Zoom. So we sort of see lots and lots of names that at least a handful that are come up in a lot of different companies, and that's based on the stats, it seems like a pretty common problem that people are facing.
And there could even be additional underlying complexity in terms of, if I'm using Cisco and I've got 2 or 3 different PSTN providers or different Microsoft providers that I have to deal with, number provisioning and so on.
Yeah, this next slide is one of those other categories. It's about meetings and sort of what's happening in that space, which this has become a really important space, and for some companies is sort of a driver of voice communication. A lot of your conversations are in voice, but tell us about what you're finding with regard to meetings.
Yeah, so the meetings are even a much more diverse environment. Almost half, or 38% of companies in our study, again in the large enterprise market, are using more than one meeting provider. And almost over half of them plan to keep that additional provider. And the primary driver for that is to support external meetings, to support user preference. So users may, you've got a standard application for that the company offers, but users don't want to use that for whatever reason, and they prefer a more comfortable experience, or they've done integrations into that experience and so on. We typically see, Microsoft, Zoom, WebEx as some of the most widely deployed ones as well. Even among the group, the 51% who had a single provider that they're supporting today. 21% are planning to add support for additional apps. Again, that's usually to meet user demand for frustration, or they're just not happy with the app that's out there, or they need to talk to folks who are using another app and they want to provide the ability for having a native experience. So this doesn't, and this chart, I think it's important to note, only looks at the people who are actively, from an IT perspective, supporting secondary applications. That doesn't mean that people aren't also using those applications on their own outside of support. So the meeting space is much more complex and much more likely to be a multi-vendor environment.
So what I mean, what we've done, and this is our last slide on the evolving UC landscape. And again, we could, I'm sure you've done other presentations that really focus on this one, and some of your studies go into extreme detail, which is information that we use and a lot of other companies use to project our own products. But we've painted a picture of complexity. There's a lot to manage. There's a lot if your job is to deliver this to an enterprise, to thousands of users. That can be problematic. It can be difficult. It's a mountain to climb. We're going to talk a bit about these challenges and how to address them. And this is I'll let you sort of talk about the top sort of challenges that management is seeing as these things come up.
Yeah, so there are three that we have identified, and I think hopefully they resonate with the folks that are attending the webinar today. The first is complexity. So, you think about it from the user perspective. I've got multiple different applications. I've got a lot of task switching going on. Think about that even maybe more so from the management side. If I have to provision an individual and I've got to set them up on a phone system and a meeting application and a messaging application, maybe with more than one device, is a much more complex environment than going back, 5 years ago or 7 years ago, whatever, when we only had a phone to worry about. So that's gotten a lot more complex, and even thinking about things like mobile clients and so on. So, if I'm that poor IT administrator who's got to move back and forth, and not only that, but obviously move, add, changes, deletions are a common occurrence throughout the day. You're creating a lot of complexity. Secondly, is common policy. So if you think about governance, security, provisioning requirements of being able to set people up with consistent access and permissions, consistent profiles, personas, depending on what their role is. Again, having to do that across multiple applications creates a lot of management overhead. And then thirdly, it's visibility. So if I'm calling into the help desk because I'm having a problem getting my phone working, or I made a call that's didn't go through, it's really tough for somebody who's that frontline support person to figure out, okay, which app do I have to jump into now, or where do I have to go to find out how that person is configured. So I want to have that single pane of glass that gives me insight into the configuration environment that people are operating in. So, if you think about all of this together, without any kind of unified management strategy, without a single pane of glass visibility, you're creating a lot of potential for error. You're creating a lot of extra work. You're not creating an environment that fosters productivity, and you're creating potentially silos of knowledge where some people may have expertise in one application, but not another.
Yeah, we see that a lot as well. So what are the options? I mean, this is, Kurmi and what we do is one option, but what are the range of options that enterprises have as they take on this challenge?
Yeah, so I think there are three areas that we see people looking at and that we study. There are the vendor provided tools. So if I'm using Teams, I can go into the operator console, do some configuration, work through that. But again, in a multi-vendor environment, it means I'm moving back and forth between different applications. Often you're finding homegrown tools, things like Excel and Post-it notes and so on for managing configuration information. Again, doesn't really scale, doesn't easily support the ability to integrate with other applications. Everything's going to be custom, lots of administration challenges there. And then lastly, third-party administration tools that are optimized for that workplace collaboration environment that allow people to support multiple vendors through a single user interface that allows you to provide common policies to automate, move, add changes, to even support self-service and distribution and so on.
Yeah, these are what we talk about a lot internally, and we see it as a cost benefit analysis is pretty straight up on that regard. So for smaller businesses where the challenges can be smaller, and so homegrown tools can work. But once you scale above 1,000, above 5,000, above 10,000 digital workers, with a goal to provide these productivity gains that we talked about earlier, you really, the complexity is almost inevitable. And not only complexity, but the evolution of complexity. So the evolution of the systems, migration of new systems, but the addition of new systems, and so it becomes some kind of a math problem, and it's cost. I mean, the goal for most companies is it's sort of like do more with less or do more with the same, and so if you can create metrics around what that means, we feel that that outsourcing or finding tools that supplement your homegrown efforts to get off of post-it notes, as you said, and get to something that is more sustainable, that is easier to use, is really a way of standardizing controls. Um, uh, we're going to focus a bit here on out on these third-party admin tools where Kurmi and others compete, and show really not how we're different from competitors, but how what we do is different from homegrown or vendor-provided tools that are much more limited. So here's
Yeah,
go for it.
sure. So we've studied the third-party admin tool space now for a number of years, and we found it only about 13% of companies that are using these today that went out and purchased a new tool to support their administration management functions. Among our success group, those are the companies in our study. I mentioned 440 companies. We identified 66 that had higher than average return on investment for their collaboration spend, meaning they were saving money, improving productivity, or generating increasing revenue associated with collaboration tools. Much higher adoption rate, almost 19%. And I think if we jump to the next slide, I can share with you some of the business
Sure.
benefits for the
Yeah.
folks who are using these tools. And I think this is where it starts to get really impressive. We found about 30% of the people who had implemented administration tools had actually taken the time to measure a benefit. The other the 60% you see on the bottom left are ones that just don't, haven't really done that measurement piece. Among those who have, I'm sorry, among those who have gone through the measurement, you could see 50, almost an hour faster provisioning, initial turn up time. Again, direct correlation to improving productivity to get people up and running faster. And then about 38-minute improvement in move add changes. So, or 37 minutes, I should say. So again, as people move around, as they change roles, as they change departments, as they're onboarded or offboarded, being able to speed all of that creates productivity gains both for the employees as well as for IT.
And this is part, yeah, this is part of the math problem. So we love it. This kind of detail is great, and we tend to find that we're successful in helping organizations that have done this kind of math and say, yeah, I mean, this is, these are real costs for our company. The cost is not just in time, but in maintaining certain skill sets internally, higher error rates, where the value of automation in speed of delivery. So it's really great to see these numbers. How else can these tools help?
Yeah, another area where we talked earlier about supporting the frontline help desk employees by giving them the ability to have the visibility into how people are configured is another key area. And so we see a lot of interest in integration of workplace collaboration, and our term for unified communications and collaboration, into IT service management platforms. You can see some of the ones I've listed there. 20% that are doing that today, a large percentage that are planning on 23 or 24, 55, almost 56%, that are planning on converging or integrating administration work management tools into their IT service management tools over time. And you can see significantly higher among that success group I mentioned earlier. 25% of those who are seeing the highest ROI for their collaboration spend are already integrating now. So, again, an association with success for companies that are taking those administration functions and integrating them into their overall IT service management architecture.
How do you? I mean, we see this more and more in the last few years, and notably among larger enterprises that have implemented these larger IT control systems that are very popular in the Fortune 500 and the Global 2000. Have you looked at the data, or have you seen differences in the data among larger enterprises, or is it consistent?
Yeah, I think larger enterprises are the ones that are more likely to have an IT service management suite. That will more often than not benefit from this level of integration or be pursuing it. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, so thank you for setting the stage, talking about some of the challenges of managing large digital worker bases. What are the thoughts, or what are your thoughts on how to evaluate some of the competing offerings? I think we have a slide here. There you go.
Yeah. So I think as you're evaluating the tools that are out there are two things you want to look at. You want to look at the features and capabilities that they bring to the table. You also want to look at how you implement those. So, depending on where you are today with the vendors that you're using in your workplace collaboration environment, obviously you want to be able to support the ones you have today and the ones you might be moving to. You want to be able to deploy the tools on-prem or cloud, depending on what makes sense for you based on data requirements or preference. You want to take advantage of the capabilities these tools have to automate and simplify provisioning, so you can reduce the need for IT expertise. You want to look at the security of the tools. We talked about ITSM integration, potentially even APIs that would allow integration into other third-party applications. You want to ensure that you can distribute support through self-service, so employees can go in and change, location, password, et cetera, but also to be able to distribute those tasks out to lines of business. So it doesn't have to be a centralized IT provisioning, but an individual department can onboard people themselves through their own distributed interface. And then lastly, you want to look at the cost of the tools, both the cost of the tools themselves, as well as some of the data we talked about earlier, where you can recognize cost savings in terms of improved productivity.
Yeah, and these are great guidance for lots of companies. As you look at these 8 tools for evaluation, what would you say are the top 3 that you see? I mean, every company will have a different list, but in your mind, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think support for current and future vendors is critical. The ability to delegate, I think, is really critical as well. I think certainly the security of the data is one that'll come up a lot in a lot of the evaluations that vendors do, or customers do, I should say.
I would agree with you on the current and future, as mentioned earlier. I mean, things are changing. You know, a lot of the systems, get what you want today, but this is about understanding what's going to happen tomorrow, and that's really hard to predict right now. And security is absolutely important. It's really linked to that delegation, sort of the access based on your role in an organization, based on your geography. We often see those two going together. It's really important. And then, I mean, from our perspective, I would say the ITSM integration that you talked about on the previous slide is quite important for large businesses, and more important as again, more with less, and systems doing the work that humans used to do, and the move to automation. So it's we're seeing pretty similar things. So what are your, based on all this information in the landscape, what are your recommendations?
Yeah, I think the 3 key takeaways are, we've shown the value of automating service management, investing in a third-party service management tool, especially in a multi-vendor environment. So I think the call to action should be, to investigate these tools and consider deploying them. Look for vendors like we talked about earlier on that checklist that'll support you today, but also support the vendors that you're moving to tomorrow. And then take advantage of the ability to distribute out functionality, or administrative tasks, I should say. So that would allow people to go in and take advantage of self-service, also to push out administration roles into individual business units as appropriate. I think those are the 3 call to actions that I would recommend folks do who are attending today.
Okay, great. Yeah, now we're gonna talk a bit. I have another minute or two. I'm gonna tell you a little more detail about what Kurmi does and how we fit in. It's really hard to encapsulate it in a few slides, because it is, this is about reducing complexity. So inherently, there's a lot of complexity in doing it. But before I transition into that, I just want to say to everyone, in your bottom right of your screen, there should be a button for questions, and we're going to have a little time at the end to talk about questions or to answer questions. So put them in there. I see a few already, and try and get through this bit about Kurmi so you know who we are and how we play in this space. Um, most notably, Kurmi provides a single stop for simplifying the day-to-day administration of this complexity, these underlying systems. So there's ones that are known and in high circulation, like Cisco and Microsoft, Avaya, Mitel, um, and Alcatel-Lucent, even others. And then there's lots of role-playing systems like SBCs and other sort of tools or systems that might be more specific to an enterprise or a service provider. And we allow integration to those systems, management of the data in those systems, auditing, control of access, and all the things that hopefully an administrator wants to be able to do their job effectively. There's the next slide sort of shows where this sits between all these different players. So on the southbound side and the bottom side, there's all the UC systems and the world of collaboration. And then up north here at the top of the slide, there's the ways you access, or there's people pushing buttons, but there's also systems, ITSM we've talked about with automation via APIs. And even when you can find a digital user base that's willing to self-manage, we provide tools, although I think a lot of workers at this point don't have time for that. So it's really important that the systems are smart. So we see a lot of, we see most of the people touching the kinds of systems we're talking about here for management are IT administrators. This one, we sort of, to bring it home here, there's we give an example here of one of our customers is actually a large European bank. We see this more and more, this idea of I'm on-prem, I'm using one vendor, I need to move to another one, I have a lot of users, and I want to do it in a really measured with a measured process, and I want an outcome that's pretty predictable, and I want a company that's going to be there with me when I have questions. And that's really where we come in again and again. I would say especially now, a lot of our customers come in at a moment of migration, and that migration is often from one system to another, or one system to two, as is often the case with Microsoft in particular. A lot of people are adding Microsoft to whatever they were doing. And generally we also see sort of this proof of concept, usually a smaller deployment that ends up going to a much larger one once the IT admin feels comfortable with the process. I see we're getting short on time, so I wanted to make sure we have a few moments here to talk about questions, to go through questions. I will pop up the questions and let me see. I'm guessing they're going to be mainly for you, Irwin, but we'll see. Okay, let me see if I. Will the slides be made available? That's a good question. I think yes. Definitely the presentation will be shared around. I think after the end of the call, we'll send out a recording. I believe that's true. Is that standard protocol, Irwin?
Typically, yeah.
Okay, I see that. Yeah, so this is maybe a question that we can go a little deeper on, but you touched on how does implementing this this kind of a management solution help enterprises with security and compliance? It's a hot button issue.
Definitely, it's one of the biggest issues we see now, and as we're talking to companies about collaboration, just because there's so many different applications and sources of data. I think a big area is you're creating an audit trail for how things are configured. When people are onboarded, what permissions they may have, how you're setting up configurations for individuals based, again, I mentioned earlier, things like persona, role, et cetera. And having a way that data can be stored and archived if you ever need to go back to it. That's kind of a little bit difficult to do if you're just updating a spreadsheet and using something that's not designed for industrial strength enterprise device administration, account management. So I'd say that's the biggest factor, or the biggest way you can benefit security. Then also just configuring people with proper permissions so that they can only access the features, for example, that you may want to allow them to access, and only access the tools that you want to allow them to access.
Yeah, great. Now, see, I mean, we're sort of butting up against the end of the time, and to be respectful of everyone who's joined us, and we want to keep it short. enough to consume here. That being said, this is a start of a longer conversation. I think everyone on this call who is facing these challenges has their own set of variables. This is about finding a solution that works for your scenario. We like to think that everyone aspires to a homegrown system that's a custom fit for what they're doing. And Kurmi, the system we've created, has a lot of built-in flexibility and customizability. And the advantage there is it ends up being a set of tools that are, yes, it's an outsourced solution, but it's a set of tools that let the sort of the preference for homegrown get the custom solution they want. And really the secret sauce is, or the special sauce is, that future proof, the ability to integrate something that is going to be good today and tomorrow, and your organization can handle. Obviously we're happy to. Here's our contact information. I know Irwin's happy to hear from you as well, and so are we. So without further delay, I want to say thank you, and thanks for joining us today. And we look forward to talking to you as your needs turn to service management.
Thank you.
Cheers.